Superhighway, heavy traffic coming in through towards Survey and then also on Kiambu Road. There is some traffic also on Limuru Road as well. And we're seeing some of that then getting in pretty heavy through towards Westlands, and it's coming off of Wayaki Way. Langata Road is just a little bit busy, and there is quite some traffic coming off of Mombasa Road going towards Next Gen. We know that there's heavy traffic coming in from Syokimau. It is very busy because that construction, we thought it would just be overnight, but hey, why don't we do it during the day when everybody's on the road? No better idea than that. So we're going to keep an eye on all of this and see how it progresses, guys. It's going to be a sticky morning, but let's keep our wits about. We'll talk on Spice FM KE on X, hashtag the Situation Room.
Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
It's 7 minutes after 8 o'clock into the third hour of Kenya's biggest conversation this morning, and getting into one that is necessary for us to absolutely have. And even as we do, our guest is seated in the hot seat, and great to have her here. And that she said spared some moments to have this conversation with us this morning. The president of the Law Society of Kenya, Faith Odhiambo, is here with us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm very well.
Looking lovely as usual. And your plate is ever as full, I'm sure.
As always.
As always. But glad to have you here this morning.
Glad to be here.
And looking at a number of conversations, but one that has actually gripped a lot of the space that we are in, regardless of how much we pay attention to it. But before we get into that, for your interpretation, CT has a proverb. He'll tell you where it's from this week, and then he'll tell you what that is, and we'd love to hear what your interpretation of that would be.
Right. Our proverbs are from the Republic of Malawi. The day will come when cats have horns.
That's an interesting one. Cats will have horns.
Yeah, something like that.
You know, I'm trying to look for an African analogy that makes sense. Cats having horns. I'm wondering why.
Why would they have horns?
Why would they have horns? And unless it's closer to analogy that when hens will fly. I think my interpretation would be there comes a time when even the most meek will one day rise up and also take up arms against oppression. That would be my analogy of the same.
We're freedom fighting today, are we?
Absolutely. The meekest of them will rise up one day. Absolutely. I think so. Interpretation is great, isn't it? Because then it's yours. Yeah. And then it actually then has a way of finding meaning for some folks. So I think that's awesome. Some things, however, that are not rested on just your opinion is the rule of law, right? Yeah. And across arms of government, that you don't really have a choice when it comes to certain things. Whether you're in the executive, whether you're in the legislature, whether you're in the judiciary, that there is a set guideline. So long as you're within an organized nation state and that you have a constitution which may be implemented as the days go by, but that overall you have some law that governs you. So you're not exempt and you can't give your opinion about whether you're going to follow it or not.
Yeah.
Sadly and unfortunately, as then contributes to our conversation this morning, is that in terms of living by the rule of law, we seem to have a number of gaps. And it's interesting because you have been at the forefront of then trying to plug some of these holes over the last many, many months. I'd like to get an overview, first of all, from you in terms of the things that you see when it comes to the application of the rule of law across the country, and where are we failing?
Well, I would say let's just start with the things that were happening in last week. I was away. And while I was away, I was amazed on what was happening in the country. We have this conversation now going on that we should not use plays to politicize, particularly children in a school institution, but at the same time, the question of right to expression and also the question of use of force and independence of the National Police Service comes into question. Because I asked myself this question in light of, the children executing a play, are they allowed to express a political position or express the actual current situation in the country? And, the hypocrisy of it all is all our set books have been based on political situations that happen not only in our nation, but other nations. From I did The Mine Boy in my first year and that in high school, and that was a depiction of apartheid in South Africa.
Right.
To date, and books of Ken Walibora, just a depiction of what was going on in the country. And majority of set books are based on the political situation. So children engaging in expression of art is a reality of the situation that is going on in the country. And maybe them engaging, focusing on one side vis-a-vis another should be, that's expression of what they want to do or engage in. And it can only be what it is, an expression in a play. What is more worrying for us as a country and a nation is what is the independence of the National Police Service? What are the police doing there? First of all, creating the element of fear instead of ensuring security for those children, and the attacks and tear gassing of school children.
Right.
And this is something that the nation frowns greatly upon. And even as the Law Society, we don't take this lying down, because these are young girls who should be getting protection. And yet this is what they are being met. And unfortunately, the National Police Service have continued to fail the people of Kenya. Because from situations of, I would say even the country is talking about femicide and gender-based violence, but here police using excessive use of force to children. And talking at the backdrop, when the Human Rights Day, when women came out on the streets, they were met by tear gas and the same use of violence. I think as a nation and as a people, we need to ask ourselves some hard questions, and also hard questions need to be asked upon the National Police Service. And also what is quite disquieting is seeing the scores of conversations by politicians on that particular subject, because people are trivializing and focusing on an individual politician and about the play instead of looking at also the greater question.
Yeah.
Why were tear gas lobbied against children? What protection ought to have been given to those children at that particular time? And what action has since been taken? We have not yet seen any statement, or at least I have not seen any statement from my POA talking about the investigation that is being done and what they ought to do in terms of ensuring that that never happens again in our country. And so I say, looking at the spectrum, disobedience of court orders is also at the heart of it, which is the heartbeat of a lot of problems in our country. Today we have executive cherry picking which court orders to obey and which not to obey. And that's a very sad analogy of what's happening in our country, because if you cannot obey court orders, then it means that we are going back to kangaroo days and right is might. And these are the things that we've been saying as a country we are not going to allow.
Right.
That court orders are only as good as those that it suits. And just looking at the political tensions that continue striving, freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, whether it's in a play, whether it's on social media, whether it's on different fora, freedom of expression continues to be frowned upon by the powers that be. And yet no action is being taken on those who express themselves that harm others vis-a-vis they give statements that are beneficial to government. And I would say this also...
Why though? This is the thing, because it seems as though it's paradoxical just looking at it, that freedoms then are not honored, but those who then trample on those freedoms, glaringly so. I mean, it's not conjecture, it's clear that those freedoms are being trampled on, but they're not brought to book or held accountable by anybody. And those who speak against that action then are, if anything, castigated, or ignored. If the LSK were to stand up today and say, we highly condemn this thing that is going on, that these individuals must be brought to book, again, it seems as though it's a mere suggestion in the face of those who should do something about it.
Well,
why?
And it's unfortunate because it's a trend that is taking shape, and that's why we continue to raise our voice, and where we can, we go to court, because I think that's the only language, and unless there's also pushback from different other institutions calling out the same, then there's nothing that is being done. And I'd say this also at the BOCREP, that we have institutions this is their responsibility and their role. We have the National Cohesion and Integration Commission, which we continue to see leaders who have continued to spew hate speech, particularly at the defenseless. Continue to roam the streets, continue to talk nonsense on public fora, and yet nothing is being done to them. They continue to speak in funerals, in churches, in different functions, and yet nothing is being done to them. And yet, when certain individuals post on social media or speak on different forums, you see the law cracking down on them. And even the cyberbullying law, you see it's used to cherry pick when to action on it and when not to action on it. And for me, it's a question of, even as we talk about the three arms of government, what are we doing as a nation? Because unless the courts also take a very bold step in how they're applying the law, and in terms of being tough as they apply on the law, then executive will never take seriously the position, the rule of law. You see, unless the same arm of government that is coming before you seeking orders before you, yet at the same time they are refusing to obey the very court orders before your honorable court. And I say this at the backdrop because this case, the High Court already ruled upon it. You remember the case of the DIG, when the DIG refused to appear before court. The court issued orders, even of custodial orders, only for him to appear, and then the court just decides to vacate the orders, then recuse itself. I'm like, that's so paradoxical. You can't say that you no longer have jurisdiction, then you vacate the orders. It also shows, not in a bad way, but some level of judicial cowardice. And this extent of, when we see court orders, I normally also see a lot of people saying, oh, SHA, LSK, you're not doing anything. But we're in court on SHA. But people are forgetting their court orders giving the government time to try and rectify. But as it tries to rectify, in the meantime, they continue to collect monies. They continue to make the mistakes. We're seeing the CS coming out saying, oh, he has discovered fraud and this has been going on. And the funny thing, there was a CS on that docket. What has happened to that CS? What has happened to those PSs? Nothing. And this same PS has been moved to a different docket. So if it's incompetence, it's been moved from one docket to another. Or if the investigations, if they're finding out fraud, who is being held accountable in terms of leadership? Even if you're saying the CS is not the accounting officer, isn't there an accounting officer in that ministry? What action is being taken? So you want to treat Kenyans to stories and saying, now you've discovered this, now you're cracking down, now you're doing this. But who is being held accountable? The problem with our country is there's no enforcement. We have very nice laws, we have very nice policies, but there's little to no interest in terms of enforcement of the law, enforcement of these policies that we have set in place. We've continued to see now called the Integrity Sisters coming out under very tough political criticism. The Office of the Auditor General, the Office of the Controller of Budget, which are now seen as the two officers that are calling out, that are being able to identify different areas of government misspending, where there's abuse of public procurement, so many issues being brought out, and they continue to face criticism. Instead of, questioning what's going wrong, have they tabled the correct report? Let us do an investigation. Let us be able to establish what is not happening in this sector, in this sector, in this sector. All we see is a lot of noise and foray to try and cover the reality of what is going on, instead of as a nation cracking down and enforcing. Because the moment we start enforcing is the moment people will start listening.
Right.
Okay, one would ask about no enforcement. One would say it is a deliberate decision not to enforce, because we talk about, say, court orders have been issued to a DIG 7 times. They decide not to appear. And a warrant of arrest is issued by a court for him to be arrested by his juniors. You know what I mean? Then we look at even recently during that play, there is the aspect of a court order has been issued. It is given to a police officer who's supposed to respect that court order and enforce it. But again, they fail to enforce it. And recently I was having a conversation with a certain police officer. There's a gentleman who was taken to court. Someone says have been issued and he decides not to go there. I listened to that gentleman saying, I will not go to court. Wataniambia, which goes to show that Kenyans as well are picking up on what the government is doing and the examples that they are giving out there, which begs the question, what precedence is the government setting to Kenyans with regard to respecting the rule of law?
Well, if you're waiting for the executive to give you any precedence, then I think as a nation we're going to fail miserably, because I don't think they'll give us any good precedence to that regard. However, we have the three arms of government. And as we talk about the three arms of government, the executive controls money. I think if we say money controls everything, they control money. And unfortunately, the National Police Service is supposed to be independent. They seemingly, what we continue to see is that it's also now an appendage of the executive. Now, the question is, what are the role of the other arms of government? Let's start with the court orders. You see, the court has the option of refusing to grant you audience, at least if it's on the same case. And still, the court orders can still hold account. People forget that offices are not perpetual. You will leave that office at some particular point. And I love the decision of Justice Odunga when as a High Court judge, when he issued orders against Kinoti then, and he stated that if this is not effected now, when he leaves office, these orders will still be effected. And that's when he realized the seriousness of those orders and he went to the Court of Appeal. And so you may think that you're above the law now, but there comes a point when you're held accountable. We have seen in other nations, in other countries, the moment certain heads of state leave offices, they are arrested and they are tried and they are jailed. And so even these individuals who think they are above the law should not stop the courts from continuing to issue orders. We have seen the summons that courts have issued in cases that were filed habeas corpus to hold individuals accountable, particularly on the abductions, have enabled us save a lot of lives. A lot of individuals have been set free. Even if the court said, even if they say they are self-abducted, whatever nonsense they say, at the end of the day, the aim is to save those lives, is to get them out. And that's what happens. And if the courts were reluctant to issue those orders, then you do not know how long those individuals would be held, and even if they would ever come back. And so the court should continue doing its work and doing them zealously. And at some point also, the courts have teeth, because when they issue custodial orders, it makes an individual realize that I will be held accountable as an individual.
Right.
There is no collective responsibility. And that's why even as we look into the case of Baby Pendo coming up, for us it's a big milestone that if we can hold individual police officers accountable, then they will start thinking and note that you may say that you are under command responsibility, but when you're found under the law, then you will face the full force of the law as an individual.
Yeah.
Now, look at the role of Parliament as well. I really say that maybe it may be unpopular, but I think certain roles that have since been given to parliamentarians that have made them comfortable should be removed. I really believe that this fund, even that they get towards
Development of the constituency.
Yeah, development of the constitution should go to the governors. They should be focused on oversight, so that they can oversight on the government as well as the different institutions, because Parliament has that power. They review the budget. As much as you say government has control of the finances, but they review that budget. It has to come through Parliament. Parliament has the right to ask the hard questions, to make the decision and stop the government and put it on its tracks, to ask hard questions. Where is this money? Recover this money fast. We are not going to allocate you this amount of money. And that's the kind of oversight that the people of Kenya would want to see, so that we can say that our parliament is actually asking us asking the hard questions, even as we have appointees of CSs and PSs, and it's unfortunate for me to say, but yesterday I saw this comment and people have been tagging me on it, and when the CS, who is going to be the CS of gender, says that these girls are getting raped because the ones who are educated,
they're looking for money.
They're looking for money. It is the most irresponsible statement I've ever had, and unfortunately from a female, that you can say the reason people are getting killed, being maimed. We have situations where husbands have killed their wives and cut them into pieces. What money was she looking for? Students who are being killed by their fellow colleagues because they have rejected them.
Absolutely.
If that's the kind of attitude an office bearer is having, and Parliament does not see the problem, and a task force has been set to analyze and also propose changes, that's the kind of attitude we continue to see in our police, in the gender desks. When people come to ask for help and you're told the reason you were raped is because you went to look for money, or this was a relationship, now it stands, so now you're coming to report. This kind of irresponsible attitude, if you're having at the helm of an institution, of a ministry that should head and protect, then I see the greater failure is not just on the executive, it's also on our legislature.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of instances, we see the Gen Zs wanted to recall a lot of their members of parliament because of failure of oversight. Your role is to ask the hard question, is to interrogate. Take the reports that are done by the Auditor General and interrogate them. Let's have proper investigations done. When we see even governors coming for vetting and, things are not interrogated fully, it raises also hard questions. And even when we have members of parliament saying they will not be bound by court orders, you see, this shows it's a stark fallacy on, them sticking to their lanes in terms of the three arms of government. But I say the judiciary is not hamstrung, or it's not tied, because at the end of the day, these arms of government still rely on the judiciary.
Did we get it wrong from the beginning? Because I hear the words in my head ringing: partisan, partisan, partisan. How can we expect somebody who is from the get-go already partisan to then make decisions or ask the hard questions or push for investigation or sit on the bench and make a ruling that is clear about what the status quo should actually be if they're partisan from the beginning? We've heard words like capture, parliament, the legislature having been captured by the executive, members of the judiciary, again, in the same place. How do we then say that the rule of law will be followed if people are already partisan?
I would say that's where it comes to public participation. I really love that word now. Irrespective of how our courts will continue to construe it, some ways I feel is quite unfortunate when you renege or take back the power of the people in terms of public participation, but also public activism. You've seen it's only because of the public activism against Shah and the outcries. I forget the lady's name who was caught on camera. Yes. Going to the CS's office, and also when she was arrested at a hospital, to the public outcry, the challenges that people were having, and it made Parliament sit and relook. I would say it in simpler terms, there are some shame news that come out that even if you want to cover, there's no way to cover.
Yeah.
And they had to sit down and start reevaluating, and the greatest choir masters at that particular time for sure were outstandingly seen questioning Shah and talking about what needs to be done now, and asking the ministry now tough questions that they were not willing to ask before. So I always say that as a nation, as a country, Kenya has had leaps and bounds, and it's not just public activism and public participation, but also the public interest litigations that are done that also aid, because the courts cannot move themselves, but people can move the courts. And by, filing and challenging and questioning, I would say I don't believe in this, in galvanizing and saying all judges are bad. We have good judges, or rather fair judges, who will interrogate the questions. And, we will now be able to discuss and make the hard questions hard and make government review its position.
Would you say that these judges who are fair are in a majority?
Well, the public opinion right now feels that they are not in a majority. Yeah. I think that's the crisis the judiciary is having right now, is convincing the people of Kenya that you'll get fairness. When people already feel that there's a particular set of court, that the moment government has a case, that decisions will always be made to a certain direction. It's quite sad for us as a nation and as a country, and that's why as a law society we'll continue to push and ask hard questions and demand for judicial independence. And why I say that is because the judiciary remains our last line of
But I
defense.
thought they had the independence.
Well, the independence would say to a certain extent. The judiciary fund to date has never been actualized. So how do you say they can totally have independence, yet they cannot control their own
I was
budget?
going to ask, how would independence look like?
Independence would look like, let's start seeing transparency in decision-making processes, and also processes in how judges, their decisions are reviewed in terms of when you file a complaint against a judicial officer. Let's see a transparent and open process from the time the complaint is made. As a complainant, you do not want to wait and hear. You just get a notification. The file was closed because there was no sufficient evidence, or the tribunal found that there was no sufficient. On what basis? Because every arbiter, you need a fair trial. I need to see a proper decision. I was called, I got to proffer my case, then you made this decision and closed it. But I was involved in the entire process. But when people don't get that satisfaction, then there is the same opaqueness that we challenge the executive for opaqueness in decision making, is the same opaqueness that we see.
Indeed.
So if you want to get back confidence as a judiciary, we need to be able to feel that, fine, I filed my matter, I lost it, that is okay. That is, telling somebody to appeal, it may seem quite easy, but just look at even the court filing fees at the Court of Appeal. It's exorbitant. Telling a member of the public just appeal, and most appeal cases, particularly civil, are not cheap. So if I sold my piece of land to fight, one part to fight to maintain my inheritance, then it's taken away. Where will I get something else to sell, to fight, to file at the Court of Appeal if the judge was biased? And we all cover it now that this is judicial independence, decisional independence. Indeed. Sometimes the devil is in the details in the decisions, and that is where you see corruption. In the decision that makes no sense, that is not based on law, but you tell an individual that go and appeal.
Okay, I want us to take a break and we'll come back because we're looking at all arms of government here and we're talking about the rule of law and its implementation. We're going to come back and look at the judiciary just a little bit because it would appear as though, even at the judiciary level, you can stop investigations from going on even when somebody then has said something, and then one must ask, okay, even at this level, if you stop it, is that also that the law is a suggestion in terms of what should happen to you? And here you are as a judicial officer with a high level of responsibility. What happens there? We'll come back and we'll discuss these things. We are in the studio today with the president of the Law Society of Kenya. Faith Odhiambo is our guest. These conversations continue after the short break. Don't go away.
This is the...
There's a bomb!
What?
There's a bomb! You have to leave!
What bomb?
There's a bomb! The tower's gonna blow up! We need to leave!
Nico, move it, move!
There's gotta get bombs out! And Aiden! Carlos, no! What about Aiden?
Yes, him too!
Aiden's
This will be the end of Aiden's
Aiden's still
insanity!
there, you can't! Kiara, get out! Get out! Bobs! Move! No! Bobs! What about... Bobs!
This will be the end of Mina's vengeance!
No, Carlos, please, I beg you!
No, I won't!
Bobs!
My children are ungrateful brats! I'll kill them!
Carlos, please!
I don't accept that. Get ready for an unforgettable experience. At KTN, we've got it all. Hold tight, because the adrenaline rush is real. Our action-packed films will have you gripping your seat. Craving suspense? Hungry for adventure? Or just looking for that perfect escape? Whatever your mood, KTN is your ultimate destination for a movie experience.
Nchi ya Kenya inaleta ama ina-import manguo kilo zaidi ya milioni 200 kila mwaka. Asilimia 30 to 40 ya manguo ambazo zinaingia Kenya ni haziwezi valika ama ni mbaya ama ni mbovu. Msukumo mkubwa ulikuwa ni kuangalia vile naweza ama vile tutaweza kutafuta biashara kutokana na hizi manguo. Miaka 10 iliyopita nilikuwa nishaona hii biashara na wakati nilipoanza miaka 10 ijayo haikuwa kwamba ni biashara, ilikuwa tu ni wazo kwamba siku moja nataka kuanzisha biashara ambayo inakaa kama hii.
Of Kenya, we're looking at the rule of law and its application to the arms of government, whereby things would have been a suggestion in some cases and not taking the law seriously. I mean, for lack of a better word. But if we come off the break talking about, issues to do with the judiciary, and whereby there's been public furor lately about, okay, so then how can we trust the folks that we take these cases to be able to sort out things for citizenry? Why would a judicial officer stop an investigation about their conduct if there was nothing wrong with what they have done? Why do we see that they're able to use those powers to stop investigation by the EACC or the DCI to say, well, you're not going to hold on that for a minute? What is the merit of such an action and what does it portend?
Well, I would say this, we are living the realities of the problems that we have created for ourselves. At the backdrop when sometimes the DCI is used for political purposes and to arm twist, and we have seen instances before even EACC being used for the same ambit, then you'll find the judiciary will also self-protect because there's that reality that, institutions can be used for purposes of trying to twist you to follow a certain line or follow in a certain direction in terms of the independence in the decisions as a judiciary that you make. And the problem, I think, was the process that was used or that was raised. But I also say in support of EACC is that to what extent are you able to disclose, even as you carry out investigation, that we're investigating this person who may be your colleague? It's for them, it's a very hard balancing, because if I know you're my friend and you're coming to arrest my friend, wouldn't that bias be there, that I would try and protect my friend from prosecution or protect my friend from orders from being issued against my friend that may end up harming the individual? And the delicate line is, when is it a fishing expedition that is being done?
Right.
And to what extent is the EACC mandated is the ESCC doing the right thing? And I think that's unfortunately the delicate line. And the reality is we need to also look harder and also see institutions challenging such decisions, because today we are living in very interesting times when if the same judiciary you come before can stop any investigations from happening to any of its members, then the question is, if the judiciary goes rogue, who reels in that judiciary?
Yeah.
Because if the same independent institutions seek to investigate and you stop and you issue orders stopping, then how will any investigations be done?
Yes.
How will people ever know the veracity of any accusations or not? And we now have a situation like we used to have of politicians, where the moment a politician is charged, they run and ESCC arrests them or captures any assets. They run to the same courts to get orders stopping the investigation or anything happening further in that matter. And so we are living the reality of the problems that we've created for ourselves over time. But it's also a worrying trend that if that's the position that will be taken on all matters, because we have seen judicial officers being tried, but I would say some of them, other measures had to be carried out to ensure that evidence was recorded against them on their conduct, catching them directly, and also the court of public opinion could not condone to have such individuals in office.
Yeah.
And the question is that the judiciary must grapple with is, if that is the hard stance that they take, and particularly if it's taken on most matters or all matters touching on judicial officers, then it will come a time that the citizenry will feel that there needs to be other measures taken to get these individuals out of office.
Right.
Because we cannot, the same institution that we are relying to uphold the rule of law must also apply that same rule of law to themselves.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I agree, and let me ask this question then. In our courts of law, do judges bring the cases to themselves, or are they brought to them by lawyers?
Well, they're brought to them by lawyers.
So if indeed something arises that brings about the discussion of bribery, are lawyers not involved?
A lawyer is involved, but let me remind you, a lawyer is an advocate for his client. A lawyer does not proffer his own case. It is a client that proffers the case through his lawyers. But then again, even on the question of bribery, I would say that I don't vindicate the legal profession. There are individuals that are known in our legal profession that people call out and have continued to call out, and some face disciplinary, as if you get the evidence, have been facing disciplinary. Because the question is, you see, when the secret is between the lawyer, the judge, and the client, there has to be one dissatisfied party, as we see in government exposes. That's why we have the government scandals, because there's a dissatisfied party in that cartel that is unhappy and ends up exposing the information. So there are lawyers that people continue to call out, and the ones that evidence is there's disciplinary action. But I'd say that as much as even advocates, we hold them accountable, I've seen situations that even a lawyer is not needed. Some go directly to the client, particularly when they see the net worth of the client and they see potential. They look for agents to reach out directly to the client. So there are situations that even I know seniors have recused themselves from handling certain matters because our client has been reached out directly. And the unfortunate part is some even now want to negotiate their fees now that they say, why should I pay you when I have bought the judge? So those are the harder questions. Yes, we don't vindicate the legal profession, those who are involved, but there are situations where there's direct involvement. And for me, I say even the higher onus is on the bench. If you take an oath of office to dispense justice without fear of favor or without any other influence, then you must take that oath of office seriously. On this side, this oath of office to dispense justice, the person who affects people the most is that judge who will affect families, who will affect lives, who will affect communities, because you are deemed as the neutral arbiter to make a decision that affects a nation, affects a people, affects, the life of somebody. And so the greater honors is those who purport to say they are clean. If you say you're white as snow, be ready to be tried and tested for claiming that you're white and snow.
You don't have to ask this question, Madam President. We've seen situations in this country where people who practice law, the advocates, are appointed to the bench. How is it then that the determination is made as to who to appoint? Because again, from the public purview, we hear of individuals who, as lawyers, were known to be as dodgy as hell. And yet, they end up being judges. So now, if the fellow was a dodgy lawyer, what makes us think that he will not be a dodgy judge?
I think, City, and let me just top up on that. And in the event that a dodgy lawyer has been appointed as a judge, what powers does LSK have in terms of revoking their practicing license, just so we have a clean bench?
Well, you see, once you join the bench, you don't take out, or those who take out, it's just merely to keep their connections to the bar. But you're not bound to take, because you're not practicing. You take out a practicing certificate because you're practicing. The question...
being in the bench isn't practicing?
No, you're not practicing.
What are you doing?
Not as a lawyer.
You're not practicing as a lawyer.
Oh, no. No. Explain the difference. You are both purveyors of the law.
Yes.
Okay. One adjudicates.
Yes.
And the other one?
The other one is arguing the case, proffering the case of the client.
All right. But it is the law that unites you.
Yes.
So, in the process of carrying out your mandate, you are saying judges do not need licensure.
They don't need license. They don't take license. Even as per our law and our act, we only regulate advocates. We don't regulate. They have the Judicial Service Commission to deal with that.
And you don't see a gap there?
I would say that the gap is filled because we have representatives in the Judicial Service Commission. We have a male rep and a female rep that represents us in the Judicial Service Commission, that is supposed to represent the views of the Law Society of Kenya. And so their aim is to oversee and raise any concerns that we may have. And so even as I asked to jump to your question in terms of why a dodgy lawyer who becomes then a judge, what makes them change? The question is, what is the kind of vetting system that is done at the Judicial Service Commission? And that brings also questions, because there have been accusations in the process on even appointment of judges. And those are now the questions that what are the transparent processes that are done. As the Law Society, you can raise concerns, you can file memorandum against any individual judicial officer who is going for an interview, and some we have seen because of representations that have been made have not made it. However, some is the reality is, irrespective of representations, you still starkly find them landing in the bench. And let me clear this notion. Even if they're the dodgy lawyers that end up in the bench, a majority who are in the bench are picked from within the judiciary, and that's a fight we continue having with JSC. There is no equality in terms of recruitment of judges or magistrates, yes, but judges, there's no equality in terms of they take more of judicial officers and promote them in the bench than taking those from outside. And I say that sometimes a mix is good, because you have old hands that you're used to, who probably are used to the status quo and system. Sometimes you need to mix with new hands who can change the trajectory of how things are traditionally done. And sometimes it helps in uncovering corruption, and it helps in uncovering cartels, because when you have new individuals coming in and we hope the vetting is done in a proper way, because they say they seek representations not only from the legal profession but from various agencies. And I've seen the Chief Justice asking for assistance from the EACC and asking assistance from NIS in terms of collating information against on individuals on corruption. So if they get all that information, the question is, how do then the JSC end up appointing those dodgy lawyers? Because if you have all the valid information, unless you also compromised in the process in which you are appointing, then you cannot blame us on this side, because you got all the information. We don't get information, access to such information. So we can only base it based on complaints that are given in the different, by your colleagues that you've dealt with, or by your chapters under the Law Society, and we table them if you're coming up for an interview. But the Judicial Service Commission that gets all this information, the question is, what do they do with it? How do they transparently take up new members to join the bench or promote them, that will ensure that we don't continue having, because the aim of the JSC was to not just deal with the issue of appointment, but even the corruption that creeps in over time. They should be able to evaluate based on complaints and have a transparent process system that works, because the greater feeling of a majority of the public is that when you complain, you will get later on an automated message that comes that this file was closed because of insufficient evidence. But you feel greatly, based on the evidence that you table, based on also the guidance you receive from your advocate, that this bench was compromised or this judicial officer was compromised. So what happens? What investigation is done?
So those judicial waters are fairly muddied, aren't they?
Yeah.
Well, I
Given
think
that what you deal with on a daily basis are muddied waters anyway. Yes.
Anyway.
Yes.
But I say that the Judicial Service Commission needs to up their game in terms of looking at reviewing a lot of the conduct. And it'll come a point that we'll stop saying decisions are judicial independence and decisional independence. Because if we continue to cover everything under decisional independence, then we'll never capture the corruption.
Right.
Because some decisions are quite stark, evidence showing that there was no application of the law, there was no proper thought process, some considerations that are then later on brought in a decision were not even there during the trial process. And so unless we open that up, because it's not enough to say appeal anyway. Not a majority of the members of the public cannot afford to just appeal. So how do we root out and stem out? It'll come a time we must look into those decisions. We must open up those decisions for scrutiny and for criticism.
Madam President, as we have this conversation, one would want to ask which is the way forward, because then again we must have good political goodwill from the top coming down, and all the other bodies just playing ball in ensuring that the rule of law is respected. So moving forward, what must we all do, not just LSK, not just Judiciary, not just the President or Executive, but all of us must do to ensure that the rule of law is actually respected in the country?
I'd like to say let me just talk about the three arms of our government. I would say that from the executive, a lot needs to be done in terms of gaining the public trust, because the public trust is the biggest problem that we are facing, because the public does not believe anything the executive says right now. And even if positive projects are being brought, who wants to believe? And everyone feels there is an underlying corruption that is going to explode. There's no genuineness in terms of delivering for the people of Kenya. And so they must crack down. I had this at a funeral. Though I didn't attend, I watched it online. Someone says that sometimes, unfortunately, there are things that you're scoring your own goals because of the decisions you continue to make. And I'll say, unfortunately, there are things that we're scoring our own goals. I'll say even some of these nominees we see for cabinet have continuously fought to ensure human rights and the rights enjoined under the Constitution are eroded, and yet they are the same candidates that we see being proffered. So it means that there's a clear delineation by the executive to ensure those who sit in those positions of power are people who want and will ensure that there is no obedience of court orders. There is no protection of the constitution. So those are your own individual own goals that people cannot and will not feel sorry for you. You either start making the right decisions so that people can gain back public trust, or you continue to make the wrong decisions and people will continue to fight you and not believe in you. When you go to the legislature, I say that they are our biggest letdown because they have failed to carry out the proper oversight that is required upon that body. We continue to see the various corruption that is ongoing. And I say, unfortunately, this lazy notion that there's corruption in counties because lawyers are being used is a very lazy notion. And it's quite discriminatory because there are laws that are there that are set in place.
Yes.
Why can those laws be enforced? Stop using the lazy nation to try and blame a sect of the society for the failures that are inherently there. There are laws that are supposed to be read. There's public procurement laws that are there. Follow the laws that are there. And people, when individuals fail, hold those individuals accountable. You cannot hold an entire institution and say lawyers are bad when you know the particular individuals who should be held accountable. Now, next, legislature should actually carry out their role. If they carried out their role and if development was taken away from them, this notion that we used to have that development didn't get to your constituency because if the presidency did not come to your area, then you'd never see development. Look at the rural roads in our areas. Where is the development? There's no proper road system that even if they say they're bringing development. We see, yes, members of parliament who have done well, but imagine if this amount of money was actually given to the governors. Then we have senators actually doing the work of oversight properly, following up and ensuring those funds are used well. And if not, those governors, we ensure they don't come back to office. Then we'd see proper development in the different counties and let the legislature focus on their role of oversight. Then we come to the judiciary. The judiciary has a long way that they must employ to ensure that they gain back public trust by having transparent process in how complaints are handled, complaints are managed from start to finish, that somebody feels their case was heard and determined properly. There's no favoritism, there's no protectionism. And even this question about protecting each other from being investigated must come to an end. When it's of value against being against executive overreach, then that is fine. However, we need to also introspect as the judiciary and accept where their failings, because people know the corrupt judicial officers. It's well known in the corridors. Unfortunately, I have been a law lecturer, and my students even tell me the going rate of some of them. And so we cannot continue and pretend that everything is well, because it will come a time when there'll be some overreach. And even if there's a change in constitution, a way of removing them. We've not had a radical surgery in this country because the Judicial Service Commission was put in place to ensure that they evaluate those complaints and do them well. But we might see a change if there is no change in the judiciary. And judiciary remains our last line of defense.
Of defense in all of this.
We need to have the judicial fund effected and set in place that they can actually have independence. So then there's oversight over them. Let them have independence. Let them able to run their fund. Let the parliament do its work of oversighting. Then this notion of saying that we are crippled, we cannot do this because of this, on the notion that nothing can be done because there is no money, comes to an end. Because if they are properly funded, they are given their fund, Parliament can do its role of oversighting how they use those monies. Then the independent institutions, I'd say there's a big failure in IPOA. To date, we have not seen proper enforcement, particularly against the police, with regards to the killings that have been there from last year to date, the abductions. We don't have answers. You know, it's quite unfortunate when your heads of the National Police Service come and tell us that, you know, we don't know who is kidnapping, but the country is safe. You know, it's quite an oxymoron. And IPOA, we've not seen anything coming out from them. And though they might say there's challenges in enforcement, I would say that maybe it needs some review of the law to support them to be able to work better.
They probably need a fund such as the one
that we're asking for
that
the
has been
judiciary.
proposed for the judiciary fund.
Exactly.
Yes.
I mean, I wish we could have more time. There's so much that needs to then pay, to be addressed. And the only way, in my opinion, for some of these things to be addressed to the extent that they need, is to continue to talk about them and to put them in the public arena.
Yes.
Thank you for being here this morning, and I'm sorry that we had to cut it short, but an hour is just an hour, but it's good that we can do this, and we hope that you can join us again in the future to look into more of these issues. She's the president of the Law Society of Kenya, Faith Odhiambo. She's been our guest this hour. Thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you.
And the conversations continue. Good morning. It's 9 a.m.
Spice up your
Unveiling Kenya's finest travel gems all in one.